Hi, I'm Aisher. In this video, I'm going to look at some of the flavours of distortion in Cubase. So I've got a drum loop. It's a pretty conventional rock drum loop. And on the side, I've got the insert set up ready to audition some of the distortion effect. Let's start with this straight distortion. So you can see straight away you get this saturation happening, and it's the boost that does the trick here. And this is actually showing you what happens to a perfect sine wave. As you boost it, you can see it starts to fold in the shape of the waveform. And actually what it's doing, as with any form of distortion, it's starting to create extra harmonics. Let's push it progressively. So you can see that it's quite easy to go from something that's quite clean sounding to something really, really nasty. The next one to look at is the Bitcrusher. Now this is a quite different form of distortion. It's based around effectively limiting the range of the digital signal path. So let's enable it here, and we can choose how we want to change the signal path. Let's push this up and put that down. This means that at the moment, I've got a pretty clean signal. I can reduce the number of bits being used to process the audio, to convey in the audio. And you can notice as you go down to this range here, the dynamic range decreases, you start to get this very, very glitchy sound. And I can also change the sample rate. To the point that when the parameters are set such a way you can only barely let a little bit of the peak through. You don't really hear what's going on. And this is a really nice effect actually for really dirtying up drums and other kinds of things. And this plugin has a mix control. So it means that although you can have that glitchy effect coming through, you can also mix in some of the original. So that's bit crushing. Now we enter the world of something that is, I suppose, an area where a process you'd expect to see when you actually enter a recording studio. And this is a guitar amp. So it's an AmpSimulator. If we enable that, it effectively is emulating the sound of a guitar cabinet mic'd up in a space. And you've got a lot of different types to choose from, and they all have different tonal characteristics. We can choose the cabinet and the actual and the amp type. And we have this EQ section, so this really mimics the types of EQ you get on a guitar cabinet. So although you would obviously expect to use that for guitars, it actually is really useful for processing drums and other signal types. The next one is much more subtle, and this is called Magneto 2, and it's a tape simulator. So the saturation is much cleaner in nature. Let's dial that down and have a listen to the audio. And slowly push the saturation up. So you can see this doesn't really simulate a dirty tape or an old school tape or a cassette machine. It really is emulating a relatively clean sounding tape machine, and it's actually just driving a little harder on the peaks. Much more subtle, and it's quite useful for adding a little bit of flavour, but it's not going to be really used for that real heavy distortion. We also have Quadrafuzz, which really kind of embodies or takes principles from all of the plugins we looked at so far and actually splits it up into multiple bands. And these bands can be tweaked. So it means effectively what you're doing is you're applying different processing to different areas of the frequency spectrum. And you can actually apply, for example, tape simulation or tape saturation, maybe to the low end here, and then for the band above it, you could have a bit of conventional distortion, maybe tape in this third band, and maybe in the top one, you could actually have some form of like digital distortion. So let's have a listen. So there's quite a lot going on here, and depending on the type of distortion you choose, you get extra parameters available. There's a noise gate that allows you to only let the sound through when a particular threshold is reached. You've got a delay for each of the different sections, so you can have very complex delay effects with distortion. You also have the ability to mix in the dry with the wet signal, the distorted signal for each of the individual bands, and you can tailor the amount of distortion and the overall level of each of the individual bands, as well as kind of moving them around and doing all kinds of interesting things. So it's a very complex plugin, but actually multi-band distortion is probably more powerful than actually using a single band distortion, because what it allows you to do is actually control the harmonics. So for something like these drums here, you can really manage how the different tones come through and manage how you get different distortion in each of those frequency bands and tailor something that has really quite a lot of impact. So it's great for electronic drums, great for rock drums, and also you could, for example, think about applying a bit of distortion to a vocal but not distorting the top end, where you might get a lot of harshness, or some of the low end, which will make it sound muddy, and then just mixing a little bit of subtle distortion on the middle areas, really tailoring the distortion so it's exactly right for the particular sound you're after. So in this video we looked at a bunch of distortion types in Cubase, and you can see there's lots of available options, from the quite conventional straight distortion, a bit like a distortion pedal, to the multi-band distortion you get with something like Quadrafuzz.